Welcome to today's episode, my friends, where you get to meet my pal, Keisha Shields. Keisha is a personal and business advisor to women leaders, and Keisha and I met while we were taking our women's leadership certification course. Though it was a digital experience, we connected right away, and when we finally met each other about a year later, it felt like we knew each other for years already. She focuses on your story and the power of your legacy and the importance of using your voice and amplifying your voice to get your story out there. I mean, if you know anything about me and my company, which is called Story and Voice, you know she's right up my alley, and I was so excited to talk all about this. We also talk about her other stories, and one in particular where we talk about her experience of having so much of her identity defined by the perceptions of others and the actions of others, and how that's impacted her life, and how much we wish people would be more person first in the way we think about each other, which we talked about in a previous episode, but this is a whole different take on that. I really encourage you, as you hear Keisha talk about her experience of feeling other, for you to think about when in your life you've had your othering experience actually make you go silent or feel like it's a secret. And when in your life you've been around someone that you didn't know something so pivotal about them, and think about why they might not have felt comfortable to share that. Again, we're here in this community to try to create space where people feel welcome to show who they are fully. And fully doesn't mean, which we talk about in here too, that you tell every single thing about yourself without privacy. It means that there is a space where people feel like they belong and can show up as whoever they are, fully themselves in the way they feel comfortable in the moment. We also talk about, as we're talking about women's leadership, I'm sure you could guess because of our background and how we know each other, but we talk about money and wealth. And as you're building your legacy, how resources and having the resources that both support you in the work you do, but can amplify out and can have a trickle effect to everyone around you. So I encourage you to think about how resourcing, financial success, money, and wealth have impacted you in your life, how there has been money passed down or maybe not. We talk about the bank that you're able to get these resources from. What did your bank look like? What does the bank of others around you look like? And I really encourage you to think about how power and positions of privilege come about with that same thought process. Well, before I give you away everything, I want you to be able to enjoy this conversation I had with Keisha. So I'll catch you on the flip side of this episode, and I really hope you enjoy. Hello, Keisha. Welcome to Checkbox Other.
Yay! Well, I'm happy to be here, Nikki.
Oh, I'm so happy. Just for the listeners, so you know, Keisha is one of those people that I see her face and she immediately lightens up my entire day. So
That's super sweet, Nikki.
Oh, just get ready, everybody, because if you're listening to this and you are, your face is gonna hurt. You're gonna be smiling. Keisha is somebody that just makes me smile automatically. So welcome, my friend.
Well, thank you for having me. Hello, everyone.
Oh, I'm so happy you're here. So first, I gave a little introduction in the intro, but introductions are so much better from you. So can you give our listeners a quick kind of Cliff Notes summary version of who Keisha is, any kind of pivots? I know you like a good aha moment. Any of those that have happened in your life that people should know about you from the get-go?
Oh my goodness, this is always such a strange question, even when you answer it every time. So usually I go to the personal, but I'll go to the work first. So I am by trade a personal and business advisor to women in leadership roles. So that's women in executive leadership, all across the board, social entrepreneurship. In a word, any leaders who are really here to change the world in a dynamic way is really who I help through life, help navigate through their stories. I help them to learn to find their voices and own their truths. Nikki, you can understand that.
Heck yeah.
And I help them to actually create a lucrative source of income from their lived experiences to go side by side with the expertise they've built up in their careers or in their business. And so that's kind of where my overlap is. I believe we all have a story and we have a purpose while we're here. And so that's where my work is. And who is Keisha? I am a woman, and I just absolutely adore myself.
Yes.
And like it took so long for me to like feel so good saying that, because people have so many perceptions and assumptions about who we are and what we should and shouldn't do. So I always like to say I absolutely feel that I am super fabulous, and I love that. And I'm a super compassionate person, and with me is very what you see is what you get. I don't have fake faces, or I've learned to kind of be who I am in various places rather than having to code switch all the time, and so that's a lot about who I am.
Well, and I don't know if, I mean, you're just, everything you just said is that and then some. You are like a human being that brings like a balm to your soul.
Aww.
You really are. So just so you all know, before we hopped on this call, I had gone through, I was on a Zoom conversation around everything that's going on in the world right now, with regard to Black Lives Matter. And Keisha was just so generous and beautifully, again, what you see is what you get, real, but also like, love yourself, come on. So it's amazing how by being fully you also create the space for people to feel like there's more than enough room for you to be fully yourself as well.
Nikki, I so appreciate you saying that, because even very recently, like this particular week here, I have had that challenge where I've had another Black woman who kind of decided to feel some kind of way about the way that I choose to speak to white women, right? And I speak to a respectful white person the same way I speak to a respectful Black person, the same way I speak to a respectful anyone else, right? And I thought it was actually quite sad that people feel that because you are engaging in respectful, compassionate conversation, right, that it's somehow, you know what I mean, babying or laying way to others. And I think that's really a shame. But it really happens when people don't know you and they don't understand that that's who you are. When you are someone like me who prefers to speak to people and not at them, right? I've learned along the way by one of the things that I do in my trainings is help people have difficult conversations, right?
Yes.
And I've learned along the way that you are never going to get anyone to ever come to your side if all you're doing is talking at them.
Yes.
No matter how angry you are, no matter how frustrated you are, there has to be a level of compassion for the person you're dealing with, not the labels that are associated with them. Black girl, white girl, this and that, but Nikki or whomever. I have to see you as a person so that you can really hear what I'm saying. And then you're actually more susceptible to stopping for a minute, taking a breath, and listening to what it is that I have to say. So I appreciate you saying that, because it is something that people tend to think you're putting on. And I've been this way my entire life, even as a child. Like I had a friend who I reconnected with her like maybe about 2 years ago. And we were like kids, and she's like, "You're the same. You talk the same. You say that." I talked like this when I was a little kid, right? And so it's just that. But I appreciate you saying that, because people feel that if you're not angry and rageful. Like I have a lot of anger. Let's be clear. I'm not a rage-driven person. Rage makes me shut down. It does not make me speak up and step up, right? And so for me, I have to navigate that in a way that is most genuine to who I am. And it's really a shame when we are called forth about it, because it doesn't fit into the typical angry Black woman, right? And I have a lot of anger, let's be clear. But I know that you're not going to hear me, because I would not hear you if you were talking at me all the time.
Yes. It's so funny. This is perfect, because so much of, you're talking about how you create these spaces for people to have difficult conversations, whether it's a group of people or one-to-one, how you actually can create that space that is safe, safe spaces. I talk a lot on this podcast about how we tend to make words mean so many things and you use it so often that it becomes diluted.
Yeah.
So spaces where you feel comfortable to show up as yourself.
Yes.
The way that you create and foster that is by allowing for you to show up as yourself and actually honoring that in yourself and leaving room for somebody else to be different than you are, but showing up as themselves.
Yes.
Because so often we have been taught, and it's so beautiful. I love that you just told the story about seeing somebody that knew you when you were younger, and it's like, it's like we saw each other yesterday.
Like, oh
right.
my God, Keisha,
yeah,
like exactly the same. Like,
yeah.
I'm like, I know.
I feel like that's the biggest compliment, though. It's so funny because in the work that I do, I find that it's so important for you to really get to know that dynamic. Are you the same person you were before you learned how the world told you were supposed to be?
Yes.
Because if those are different, it's really important to understand who you are versus who you are with whatever costume mask that you've been told or conditioned you need to operate as. So personally, for me as a kid, I started speaking very young, and my poor parents, who both are not super talkative humans, I was a kid in the baby in the top of the grocery cart being like, hi. My first word was hi, and I was like, hi, and people would walk over and be like, oh, hello, wow, she's so small talking to us, and my mom's like, oh, shy person is like, she only knows hi though. Yeah. She's just now we're gonna have to talk, and I'm not somebody that wants to. Cool. And so that's who I was from word one, and before that, and then life happens, the world happens. I talk a little bit about this in my TED Talks, but you end up, depending on who you are, but in a lot of the women's leadership work we do, you end up being made smaller and quieter.
Yes.
And you are shoved down and pushed aside, and your emotions are supposed to be numbed out. So therefore, you feel other by just existing, even if everyone around you is also numbed out, silent, and small. It's become such an individualized experience where you are not allowed to exist as yourself, but you're also not allowed to congregate with the other people that aren't allowed to exist as themselves either.
Exactly. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, Nikki, because that's why when my childhood friend made that statement to me, it hit me and I lit up.
Yes.
Because it had been a full circle experience for me. Like you, I started out there, just like this as a child, and I was silenced along the way. I was taught to diminish it, to minimize it. I was too big, right? I was too boisterous. I was too talkative. I was too this. And so I started to slowly pull all the way in, caution myself before I speak, take a breath and think, wait, is this the right, all of that. And I had decided just some years back that I was not serving myself. I was serving everyone but me.
Yes.
And doing that work to come back around, and for when she finally saw me, because she didn't know me in those in-between places.
Right.
But when I came back around and finally connected with her again, and for her to say, you have not lit me up, because that's who I was at my most genuine, natural state of being before I was taught that it was too much.
Yes. It's the best, 360 reviews they do at work, where every year you come back around to see how you did. You're like, wait a second, this person knew. Thank you. This is the best feedback. You didn't even know how hard I was working towards this feedback. So you couldn't have even been trying to make me feel better about anything. It was so honest.
Yes.
So in those veins, we're here at Checkbox Other. I know you've got a couple other experiences you want to talk about. What times in your life have you felt like you don't belong? I heard the too much thing, which I identify so much with. I held my heart on that one. What other times in your life have you felt other?
Oh my gosh. So I would say the first memory I kind of have of being other was as a kid when I felt crystal clear on who I was supposed to be. I felt very other because people, I always say when I was 7 years old, I had what my friend called my first encounter with God, right? Oh. She called it that some years ago when she first heard it. She was like, that was your first encounter with God. I was 7 years old and I was literally going about my day. I was at school. All of a sudden, it was like heaven opened And I got this major, what I know now as a download. I didn't know that then. It was like as clear as day. It told me what my life was going to look like, what I was going to be. I was going to own my own business. I thought it was going to be a hospital at the time. I was going to be a doctor. My husband was going to be in California. I was going to foster and adopt. I was 7 years old, and the majority of people, I had no clue what they were.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even know what that is.
7-year-old, you was like, hold on a second.
Yeah, and like I'm looking, and people are my friend Tiffany was in my first grade class.
Yeah.
And my friend Tiffany at the time was looking. She's like, "Are you okay?" I guess because you can see like that numbness, and they were looking, and everybody's playing around, and I'm just like, "What's happening?" And I remember I got off the school bus and I ran home to my mom, and I'm like, "Mom, my husband's going to be in California, and he's going to cook and clean, and I'm going to see this and that and that," and she's like, "Okay, baby, sure. Yeah, sure. Of course." Like, did something happen? And I'm like, no, but as a little
Did they
kid,
give you too much sugar today? It's like, no, it happened, I swear.
I'm like, I promise. And they said I was going to foster and adopt, which I did. All these things that I didn't know. My husband was from California. Here I am, this little girl from Georgia, small town Georgia, didn't know anybody on the West Coast, right? Like all of these things. And so it was just so clear. But as a kid, I was the big thinker, the planner. I was the visionary. I was the one that knew that I would make it no matter what. I was the one who dreamed of going to the Ivy League and the this and the that. And that was very unusual for my family and environmental dynamic. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times it was a lot of the, oh, okay, sure. Yeah. Sure. Okay, but what job do you want? Right. But what, and so I felt very other, and I felt like no one could understand me. Yeah. The other incidents is that I'm 5'11", which I love. Yes. And so I was always when I was in kindergarten, I was 5'1". That's how, so I've always had.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. So when I finished elementary school, I was 5'9", so I've only grown 2 inches the entire rest of my life, right?
Wow, yeah.
So I've always felt very different. I'm like tall as the teacher, taller than people thought I was a chaperone, and like all of this. And I'm like, I'm 6. I'm like, what do you mean, right?
You're like, of course, that's why 7-year-old me got my whole life story.
I'm like, because I was so much taller and bigger. Yes. And it made me very self-conscious about myself, right? Yep. Very self-conscious about myself. And so I always felt very different, like I had to kind of tiptoe around or start making myself smaller. And I would cry. I was like, why am I like this? I always felt very different, in that way. And then growing up, 2 things. The first experience is being in an executive role, being the youngest exec. I was in my 20s, and I was the youngest, the first female, and the first Black. Okay. Mm-hmm. And this corporate executive role of the boys club, right? Mm-hmm. And feeling very othered because I knew that I, quite frankly, was the brightest one out of the whole bunch, but not being heard. Yeah. And I started to question if I was the tokenized person there. Mm-hmm. And I always felt very uncomfortable because there were things to this day that I regret. For example, sexist comments that I didn't have the courage at the time to speak up and out about, right? I always felt very other in that role. People assumed I was the secretary, or this and that. And I'm like, well, no, I'm actually the exec here. How can I help you? You know what I mean, right? I always felt very othered in that way. And so I started to silence. That's when the silencing of myself started, because they would take credit for my ideas as though I had never said them before. And I'm like, I literally just said that. Yeah. Yeah. Like,
and then they don't hear you say that either.
No. And it's like, you know what I mean? Right. And so it started a lot of that. And then during that time, before that time, so the biggest other for me has been being with an incarcerated partner. Has been one of the biggest others for me, not because my husband was incarcerated, but because here I was, this professional career executive woman, right? And when you're at that space and you're going out to the dinner parties and you're invited to this thing and they all want to know each other and all of that, I would always hold my breath.
Yep.
Oh, well, why don't your husband come over? And they knew, because they knew I was married. I had a name change. I had my wedding ring on. Like, they knew all of the things. They knew he existed. But they always want to know, well, where is he? Like, well, why don't y'all come up? Why don't you? And there was always that dread of, because I'm like, as soon as they hear that, they are going to make asinine, misjudgmental, erroneous assumptions about who I am.
Yep.
And so for the longest time, I had two separate lives. There was business Keisha.
Yep.
And
Keisha.
But I wasn't even going by Keisha at that time.
Okay.
I had created a whole other protective identity. So that way, if people searched for business Keisha, they would not find personal Keisha.
Yep.
It was a very intentional and exhausting way to live.
Yeah.
I had to make sure the worlds didn't collide. I had to keep making an excuse. And I always laugh now, because if I invite someone out and they're like, oh, my husband's in the military, I always assume he's in prison.
Yeah.
Or, oh, he's at a work. I always assume, because being in that dynamic, all of the excuses that you have to make, that you feel you have, air quotes, to make, right? And that was a big other for me, because I couldn't even be who I was in my personal life.
Yeah.
Because I felt that I had to create an identity in order to not have my income, my reputation, all of that discredited. I'm like, I've done all this work. I'm not going to be discredited because of something someone else did.
Right.
Because I happen to be partnered with them. So for me, that dynamic intersected when I was in that executive role, right?
Yeah.
Because they wanted to hang out with the husband. Oh, where's the guy? Where's the this? And I would silence myself and not speak up anymore, because I didn't want to draw unnecessary attention to myself.
Yeah. And, there's two components that come up here. There's the one where it's, I don't want my identity to be tied by someone else's actions, but I also don't want my identity to be tied by whatever outdated, I don't even know if outdated isn't even the word, inaccurate, ignorant assumptions you make based on some aspect of who I am and my life and my partner's life or anything, because you're not getting the full story. I always, when I talk about like, the fact that we live in, it's even more so now, we live in social media worlds, right? Where we're seeing headlines and maybe 140 to 280 character tweets of things. And we take that as gospel, that's all we need to know. It's those however many characters, whole stories right there. Give me one picture. Based on that picture, I know everything about that person. And not only is my identity not tied to my decisions, my actions, and my behaviors, but it's also not even tied to who I am if you took the time to get to know me. Because you've already made up a story, whether I'm in the room or not, whether you know about me or not. And if I give you one piece of information, you're going to spin a whole different story from, if you saw it on TV or you heard something somewhere, or you're just overly fear-mongered brain is telling you something about someone that's different from you.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's a big problem in the other category, right? Especially, that was my biggest thing. It's like, I was so worried that people were all of a sudden going to forget who I was, who Keisha was, and all of a sudden start to question everything they knew about my existence, right? And it's like, I'm real, I'm here, and everything that you have seen is real, right? Now I don't have that issue, because I'm very upfront that my personal life is sacred to me. You scroll through my social media, you will rarely find, I'll share bits and pieces of life, but never the personal stuff, right? I don't hide it, but I realized for me, it was sacred. There are some things that just simply don't belong to you, right? And that for me is one of them. That does not belong to you. Thank you very much, right? And people do draw those like inaccurate, erroneous conclusions. And that's how people who feel othered stay othered.
Yeah.
Right? They stay silenced. And I want to clarify when I say silenced, right? They
Yes, please.
stay silenced based on what social media feels you should be doing. But those same people are offline doing the freaking work.
Yep.
Or they're in corners of the online world doing the work. But people make a lot of assumptions when they feel that you are immobilized or not doing enough. And then when they speak to someone who actually knows Keisha, and they tell them, oh yeah, well, I worked with her when she sat at ceasefire tables working with both sides of gang members, okay? Or I know her when she spoke at the International Human Rights Convention in Philly and in DC those years ago, and she spoke on Finding Your Voice, she spoke on racism, she spoke on all these things. People don't know those things, right? And then all of a sudden, oh, right?
Yeah.
Or when they found out, oh yeah, she used to be a COO, so you're questioning this thing. Oh, people make a lot of assumptions. If people hear first, she is married to someone in prison, what do you think they're going to initially think about me? Let's just be all the way real, Nikki. It is going to be so much, there's going to be this bias, this stereotyping, prejudicial existence.
And dehumanizing and minimizing experience.
Dehumanizing, right? And then everything they hear from that point, all of the good things, right, is going to be filtered through that lens. But what if they first see me as this brilliant, compassionate, loyal, like just down friend, girl, woman, and then they find out, oh, her husband is incarcerated. Now there's admiration, there's compassion, there's all of these things. So looking at it from one versus the other, two identical scenarios.
Yes.
You have this person, this is a situation, but the way that people learn about your story is important because it makes a difference on where the judgment ultimately leads.
Yes. You know, I had a guest, my goodness, maybe 6 months ago. Her name is Lillian Elmore, and she introduced me to person first language. We were talking about ableism and how people will, take the humanity out of describing you, and they will not say that you are a person that is a person in your own right that is experiencing this particular part of your life in a way that's different maybe from the person that you're talking to.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so much of this, one of the it was earlier this year, I was at a retreat and we were talking about, we watched a film, I think, or I watched a film recently, and somebody said to me as we were watching it, they said, it's the first time that I had heard, it was about slavery in America. And it was the first time they had heard somebody say a person who was a slave, who was enslaved instead of a slave. And the difference of just shifting the language brings the humanity back to that phrase and that sentence. And the same experience here of, if you're not going to see me first for who I am, and you're going to see me for whatever you saw between me and you, you're never going to get to the real me, because all those barriers are going to stop you from actually experiencing who I am.
Yes, absolutely. Person first, people first, and I'm glad that you say that, because I want people to really take that away for themselves. And when we're talking about like person first language, for example, like I first came across that, my last like actual job position, non-executive job, was with California Early Start. So we worked with babies 0 to 3 who had developmental disabilities and delays, right? Like that was the whole thing. And we talked about the importance of people first language. And it gets challenging for a lot of people because even some parents are not versed. So they will say my autistic child or my disabled son, right?
Yeah.
And so it makes it sometimes, nothing against the parents, but sometimes it makes those language feel, okay, oh, well, but she said it, right?
Yeah.
Like, what does that have to do with you and how you see and address other people, right? And I encourage people to do that for themselves. when people address you and acknowledge you, you are a person first.
Yeah.
You know, and we have to be willing to correct I believe in gentle correction where necessary.
Yes.
I will also get down when necessary. Okay.
Yeah.
Gentle correction when possible, right?
Yeah.
That you are worthy, you have value as a person in spite or despite of anything that you've experienced.
Exactly. You know, I feel like we're feeding so much into the word that I feel like you embody in a different way than I had heard it before you, around legacy and how important it is to be crafting and owning your narrative and your legacy from an earlier age. Than I feel like so much of when you're hearing about legacy is, you know, in the fact that there are folks in the past and we learn about their legacy.
Yes.
But when we are here now in the present moment, that no matter what your age is, no matter who you are, what you're doing, you are constantly building towards that legacy. So can you talk a little bit more about your work with regard to legacy and how impactful legacy can be for each and every one of us?
Oh my gosh, Nikki, legacy is such a tricky topic because it means something different to so many people.
Yeah.
And to a lot of those people, it actually doesn't mean anything than what they've been told it means. And that's the challenging part, right? Most people don't think about legacy. We do now, but we didn't for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
Most people did not. I've always, you know, been very focused, even when I didn't have the language for it.
Yeah.
Right. And, you know, and so what I think about, first, I'll tell you, for me, one of the biggest things that legacy is to me and in the work I do, I always say that legacy is, what are the stories, what things are people going to be telling about you long after you're gone? So there's this lady, she was a white lady, and I feel compelled to say that. And her name was Mary Dixon Kies, okay? And she was the first known woman to get a patent, okay? And long story short, the patent warehouse all those years ago caught fire. And the documents that show she owned the right to the patents burned in the fire. So there was no proof that she owned it. The only reason why we know about it is because people continue to tell what she did long after she was gone.
Yes.
So I always related to that, like I always say, what would happen if all the proof you existed burned in a fire?
Mm-hmm.
What is it that people would tell about you? What would they continue to say about you? Oh, Nikki, let me tell you, Nick, to me, that is what legacy is.
Yeah.
And a lot of people immediately go to what's tangible. Legacy is intergenerational wealth. Legacy is intergenerational healing. Legacy is this. The outcome, the result of that, absolutely, if done properly, can be that.
Right.
But if you have that, people are going to tell something about you. How did you get it? The story, is it going to be one that you're proud of, right? That they're saying, oh, well, actually, she did this and she was intentional about making sure that those of us behind, are people going to be saying that, or is it going to be something else, right? So when you think about your legacy, always think, if everything is my proof, if the internet imploded, if fire burned down my work, my business, my building, what in the world would people actually know I did here?
Yeah. And, you know, one question I have about that, especially in the women's, so Keisha and I, we met doing our women's leadership certification. And so I always kind of feel compelled in most conversations I have to bring this up, but with you, it's like, yes, there's no extra kind of definition and description. You know, often women, when we're talking about things, because we've, again, been conditioned to be small and whatever, but also to be caretakers.
Yes.
That so much of our legacy is how other people feel because of us, not necessarily about what we have done. And even when you just said that she intentionally brought people along, it's, she made me feel good and I felt great. Can you talk a little bit about how that differs too? Because, you know, so much of us is, how we reflect on others if we fall into the patriarchal structures that we live in.
Mm-hmm. So for me, the distinguishable difference that comes up right away is the difference between you feeling that I rescued you from something, as opposed to you recognize that I intentionally laid the foundation for you.
Yes.
And to me, that is a big difference between saviorism and legacy, right?
Yes.
My legacy is not what you felt I did for you. It's what I took being who I am to you and decided to intentionally do for others who are not here where we are just yet.
Yes.
To me, that is legacy. To me, legacy as a Black woman speaking for Keisha, okay, I don't speak for Blacks, I don't speak for Black women, I don't speak for women, but I do speak for a Black woman named Keisha. For me, my desired legacy is one that has a $1 billion trail attached to it. Okay?
Yes, please.
I'm going to just tell you, and I'm going to tell you why. Black people were stolen from their lands, forced to work on lands that very few of us own anything on.
Yep.
Okay? I want to know that at the end of the day, I'm able to not only be a resource, but provide resources for the community, for my family, for my friends. Like, I'm that friend who, like, I'm telling you, if I got it and I got you. Right? My friend graduated college the other day, and like I had planned her this like luxurious day at the spa, right? And the COVID shut it down, so she didn't know. I said your gift is coming whenever everything is safe to do, right? But like I'm that girl. I believe in taking care of my people, but I want to know. I want to be able to own land and actually have training centers there where people can come express their entrepreneurism. I want my children to have ideas and be able to explore them. I want them to say, Mom, you know, I had this idea, and let them work out the little plan. And you know what? You're serious about it? Here's the money. Go. I want you to do it. I want you to see if it works. I want to have the capacity, because not having the money, not having the connections, not having the resources is one of the things that kept me from launching the big dreams I had until I got to this point in my life.
Yeah.
It was always a very smaller version of what I really wanted, and I always hated it. I'm like, this is not it. This wasn't the vision.
Yeah.
These wealthy families, and I had to correct this the other day to someone, gently, of course, for me, is that they said something about billionaires and how they're just so disgusted with billionaires. And I had to stop and say, well, let's take a pause here, because there are some ethical people who happen to have billions. People first. When you lump them into that category, you take away from those people who are literally rebuilding communities, who are not in the spotlight because they haven't committed a crime.
Yep.
Most well-known billionaires are known because they committed some crimes, some schemes, some scandal, but a lot of them are quietly sowing seeds, millions and millions, in rebuilding. So I want people to think about, don't look at wealth as a nasty word. Don't shame people because they want wealth.
Yes.
If you don't desire it, that's perfectly okay. But you cannot have intergenerational legacy without the appropriate allocation of resources.
Yep.
And I want to do my best to make sure that my children, my nieces, my friends' children, don't have to go and beg someone else to give them funding for their ideas. I want to be able them to go to the trust, right? Whatever their thing is, and to be able to take that and go and ethically do what they feel is going to help to change the world. And you cannot do that with $500 in the bank.
Right. And I mean, if we're going to call a thing, that's how America's been built.
Yes.
For a population of the wealthy in America.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. There are some that haven't, but
Mhm. Yeah.
there's some bank you're pulling from, whether
Yes.
it's a literal bank or a figurative identity-based bank, you're pulling from a bank.
Absolutely. And so my thing is that those type of resources needs to be in the hand of world changers.
Mm.
And that's why I say legacy.
Mm-hmm.
I would give that money in a heartbeat to someone who was going to take it and literally transform the way the world works, the way we see each other, the way we talk to each other, the way that we engage, children having better educational opportunities. There's so many different ways that money stops them from really building it.
Yeah.
Because they're shut down. The white man at the top is never going to use his pen to sign off on something that is going to take down the very systems that he has built to keep you from doing it in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So if enough of us meaning people, this is not race, this is not women versus men, if enough of us, the world changers, the ones who are going to use the seat for good, use the table for good, for those of us, legacy is important. It's critical.
Yeah.
Because if not, what's going to happen is we're going to be like right now in the 60s, what are we doing? Marching, rallying, protesting for the same crap that they did back then, because we don't collectively have enough resources to do anything significant about it.
And to be heard.
And I would like to do my part to minimize that and to shift the power dynamic.
Yes.
And to shift the resources, because resources contribute to power, especially in America. I cannot speak for any other country or continent, but here in America, resources and money shift the power dynamics.
Yes.
Sadly, but it is so. And so for me, if the money piece, maybe you don't need it. Maybe that's not your vision. That's why I always say you have to start with the first part, which is, what do you want people telling about your work if everything vanished? If all your proof vanished, you must start there. You must start there, and the rest of it will make its way known. I just know what, for me, it is because I've done this work since I was a kid.
Yeah.
I had a vision of not being able to do my ideas because my parents didn't have the extra money. Right. Or they didn't see the value in it being a viable idea because I'm just a little Black girl.
Right.
Right.
Well, and we operate, again, I think there's a part of this that there is so much shame tied to money in conversation, but we also operate in an economy that we are proud to say as American that is a capitalistic society.
Yes.
So those two sentiments make it so often we are held down by our money beliefs and pigeonholed from sharing our stories, from living our legacy, from expanding past what feels safe enough. So we don't want to lose whatever resourcing we have by taking the chance of living fully as ourselves.
Yeah.
And I heard you actually talking about this, about how there are so many high income women that you've worked with that have been operating in this kind of I forget what the word was you used, but like this shell, this protective shell to appear the way they need to appear out to the world because, okay, I have financially, I have money coming in and I don't want to chance losing that because I'm going to share who I am. Can you talk a little bit about kind of how that's played out? I know personally, that's definitely a big hurdle that's happened for me in leaving. I was in corporate. And it was, on your podcast, I talked to you about it being my abusive sugar daddy.
Yes.
But, I think even right now, as I'm navigating some client related stuff, as you're kind of owning your own stuff, but money is in play, I'm starting to find myself battling the same demons around money messaging and value and worth. And just the viability of living as fully me or having to shrink down to fit to then be compensated with what my coach calls thank you pellets. So animals get pellets to be conditioned for how they do things. That money is that way of doing that and keeping you trained and in the cage that you're in and in the ways that we want. You might never actually be satiated by those pellets, but you're afraid that you're never going to get them again. So I'll take what you're going to give me.
Yep. Yes. Nikki, the first thing I'm going to say is I have found in my work with women all across the spectrum of leadership, right? This is people who are leaders in their community organizations all the way to the Fortune, executive level type, right? Is that I have found when women in particular, women leaders in particular, have that dynamic, it often is because they are the breadwinner in the dynamic, right? Mm-hmm. They are often the breadwinner, and sometimes it's not in the amount of money, but in the stability of the money.
Yep.
Right? And so there is a legitimate concern that pops up with, I cannot risk losing my livelihood. Right?
Yep.
And oftentimes, because we live in such a judgmental, a typically judgmental society, we would rather know that we have stability, even if it means we minimize and we pull back away who we actually are at our core.
Yep.
And part of my legacy is wanting to shift that. Being who we are will help the money flow in ways we never understood. Being more to others who we fully are, right, will help that. But we've been conditioned to do the work.
Yeah.
When I say do the work, do the job.
Mm-hmm.
Because even if you own a business, you're still doing a job.
Yes.
If we be very honest about that, and usually you're working way more hours.
I was gonna say, add an S to the end of that. You're doing many jobs. I used to do, even when I worked in corporate, I probably did about 5 jobs. Now I'm doing about 500 jobs.
Easily.
As I'm sleeping even, right?
Yeah. On Monday morning, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm like laughing till I cry, but yeah.
Like seriously, and so a lot of it is a legitimate concern for stability. Right?
Yes.
The second issue that I have seen happen with that is, okay, even if there's a stability, some people are like, oh, I don't need the stability because I know that I can make it in other ways. A lot of times it comes with, I have worked so hard to get here. I have blazed through so many roadblocks. People tried to keep me, and I did my thing. I became educated. I did my work. I did this, and I am not going to jeopardize the credibility that I built to get me here.
Yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. That's often the second thing that I see is credibility. If people know that, oh, she's married to someone in prison, all of my 20 years of credibility are going to go out the window, and I'm not doing that. And that's something, right? That is a hard barrier to overcome, because you can always find a job. But building and rebuilding credibility is not always easy.
Yes.
Depending on who are the ones that's breaking it down to begin with.
Yeah.
Now, if you're just well known in your community, you can move to a different community and rebuild credibility. But if you are more well known in other spaces, it is a real threat to livelihood and wellness and mental wellness.
Yeah.
If credibility is destroyed by those whose intentions were not pure to begin with.
Yeah.
And so many of us have a barrier there where it's like, it's not safe, because if I share this thing, like, yes, it might help a few people, but what's going to happen to me in all these years that I've worked to climb this to get here? And that truth fear, that truth becomes a fear. And it becomes a psychological and emotional fear that exists, even when the reality of it hasn't actually happened.
Yeah.
The emotional fear becomes so paralyzing.
And very real.
Very real, right? Yep. That you start a little bit and then you never take it. And then you spend a lifetime of adult regret. Because even though to all these people, you look so successful and so happy, and look, she started 3 things, and all look like that to people, right? And in the inside, you battle, sometimes daily, like with just the regret of, I know I'm meant for more than this.
Exactly.
And not only do you know it, you actually know what it is. And that's the hard part. I know.
It's like right there. If I just reached a little further, it's right there.
It's there. And I just had this conversation, Nikki, when I just said that, I said the difference between me and a lot of other people, right? And a lot of people like us, is that it doesn't feel light years away. It's like, I can see it right there.
Yeah.
Like, I literally, it's like, if I can just find that right, I told my husband, I said, it's like, I have this plug in my hand and I'm just trying to find that right socket.
Yes.
And it's like, gonna just open it. It's like, I can see it.
Yes.
Like, you know what I mean, right? And so many of us are like that. And so it becomes a very real challenge, Nikki, with women leaders, because credibility affects perception, which affects perceived power, which affects your money. It is a cycle that continues to happen. And so many of us who really want to do the things to make the shift and really step up and tell the stereotypical, biased, like, stories that people are not necessarily going to like about us because they put us into this box of who we are. Like, the people I know have Keisha in some kind of a box. One that fits what they want to believe is true about me, right? And when it shakes up that, it feels very dangerous because you lose the emotional safety and stability, not the financial, but the emotional and safety stability, which I think is more harder to come through than financial stability, right?
I hear
that.
that.
You have people who have a ton of money and who feel very unstable. They feel unsafe. They don't feel secure, right? And so that's one of the things also that happens with the women in leadership when it comes to legacy and when it comes to feeling othered and when it comes to speaking up. It's like those real barriers. And I always say, like, when they talk about barriers to leadership for women, there is one huge barrier that nobody addresses. And it is the one of people having these things about their lives, these experiences that are actually impacting them not going forward. I, for a long time, I got to a point where I sabotaged my career because I knew if I go into this role, which is the role I really, really wanted, I was gonna have to be in the public eye, and people are always very relatable to me. They're gonna wanna know who I am, they're gonna wanna know all this stuff, and so instead I would pivot and go over here and do this thing where I had this barrier, right? You know, say, why don't we have more women in leadership roles? Quite frankly, I can tell you that is one guaranteed reason why there are not more women taking the plunge to more powerful positions, not more lucrative, that could come with it, but positions of power, because they don't want to be blasted or spoken at about their experience and their lived story that they have been through. And not enough. I look at Harvard's women's leadership, you know, I look at Cornell's, I look at all these things, and I never see that listed on the list of barriers to women in leadership, right?
Yeah.
And that is a big one. When women are at that point, they come to see me. And what I would really like to do is see them go to those organizations as well from an institutional standpoint. But to answer your question, Nikki.
Oh, you did? Yeah, go on.
Things, right?
Yeah.
And it's that we have these invisible barriers that people want to believe are secondary barriers, when in actuality, if they actually felt safe enough to lead a group of people, you know how many people, look how many people are in prison in America. Every one of those millions of people have a family member in this country.
Yep.
Okay? But for some odd reason, it is the most taboo thing
to talk about.
Say, I have someone in prison.
Yep.
And to say, oh, I'm actually with someone in prison. This person in prison was not always in prison, people.
And it's a person either way.
It's a person either way. This person exists, right? Outside of these things, but it's such a taboo thing. But when I speak up, like in that, I use that in speaking othered. When I use that example and people find out, it is inevitable that somebody comes to me and they're like, I didn't know that. Well, can I tell you, like, my brother was this. or my brother's there now and I didn't know, or okay, yeah, my husband, like it's inevitable.
Right.
It's like the secret society that nobody wants to be in.
Right. And right, you watch something like 13th, which shows you 1 in every 3, 1 in every 5. It's, one of the things that came up to me as you were just talking about women leading, that actually feels very similar as far as like numbers and kind of this known unknown, is when women are leaders, as you were just talking about, being afraid of like being exposed, right? Like, and exposed in so many different ways. I mean, think about how women are from a very young age. Their bodies are viewed as not their own, right? That they're judged and nipped and tucked and moved and covered because, oh my goodness, you are the temptation in that Garden of Eden, right? Just by existing.
Yes.
But then you think about it as women, again, numbers wise, if we had I had a previous episode that was around sexual assault, and we talked about numbers there, that 1 in 3, 1 in 5, similar type numbers, that there are people walking around with these experiences that have shaped their ability to feel like they can put themselves out there, that they can stand and be strong. And I'll tell you personally, for me, I've had such a difficult time with stepping into the light. I mean, and I'll say this, again, the little kid in the shopping cart saying hello, no problem saying hi, no problem being seen, have a wonderful ability. Again, like you were saying, personal people get attracted to me. This is great. I love talking to people, but there is this piece that comes up where you're getting grasped at. It feels more like a meat market than you taking up your space. And so as a woman stepping into a space of exposure and leadership opportunity, not only are you at risk, like a man would be at risk for whatever decisions he's made or failures or, profitability elements that are going in, but there's this whole other realm with which we are seen, and that lens that we are seen, that we can't hide that we're a woman. Do we try though? I mean, you should see my outfits from when I worked in corporate. I tried to cover up every aspect of me that looked feminine. And let me tell you, there's a lot of parts of me that look very feminine. How do I do that? I try my best. And I feel ashamed. And so therefore I make myself smaller. So even in stuff like dress code that's happening, not to mention the fact that your voice doesn't get heard, not to mention the fact that you don't get paid the same as somebody else doing the same thing as you. It's this whole piece that goes along with this perceived element that it's there before you ever even walk in the door. It doesn't matter who you are. That lens is there too.
Absolutely. And I want to add one other thing, Nikki, that I was going to say before, but I didn't, because my answer was getting a little lengthy.
That's okay.
That one of the things that I don't think we talk about enough, but is, I would say probably top 2 reasons why, when I work with women leaders from all over, is one of the biggest things is that they know that sharing who they are, people are going to desire for them to be more and more and more seen, right? Oh, well, you should this, and like they know it's going to cause them to need to be bigger, right? And yet many of them are very private people. And they grapple with, I don't want to lose that sense of privacy that I have over my life. I'm not a spectacle. They don't want, they're tired of being a spectacle. They are tired of being the one lone example of success in this particular thing. And I went through that period. I'm like, you know what? I'm tired of being the example of a successful woman who's married to, I am tired of being that one example. Oh, you got a husband in prison, you got a brother in prison, you got a this. Oh, I know someone, her name is Keisha. Why don't you give her a call? Just because we share that identity, there doesn't mean that I'm assigned to them. Right? Are they in leadership? Are they also, a world changer? Okay, then maybe. I don't want to be, by default, the token example of what that everybody feels compelled to come to. And a lot of women who are called to literally transform the world do not want to be the token example that everybody calls when they need an ear or a this. They want to be accessible, but they've done that their whole lives.
Yeah.
They want to be able to inspire, to encourage, to motivate, to teach, to lead. And at the end of the day, they want to go home and shut their door and live their life that nobody else is privy to what's happening. And that is a big one. It's that need for discretion and discernment while you are moving into positions of visible power. And
Yes.
that keeps a lot of brilliant women from actually telling more of who they are. Because now, while they're going to alienate some, they're going to become even more relatable to so many others.
Yeah.
And that pressure to be the one who makes it, that pressure to be the one who does it, that pressure to be the one who now is assigned to every person that has dealt with that scenario is too much. And they were like, I would rather live my awesome, amazing life.
Yep.
And then there's a place of them, but it never dies. But they straddle that line, Nikki, because they know that they're meant to do it in a different way. But their privacy and their sacredness of their personal life is important. And we live in a society now, especially, where you are not off limits to anyone. They feel they have an absolute right to know who you are. You know how, like, they say you Google something and like the suggestions that come up, right? Like, I don't usually Google myself, but sometimes I want you to.
I Googled you yesterday.
I my name, right?
Yeah.
One, I think it was either first or second suggestion that came up was Keisha Shields' husband. Why do people need to know who he is? Why do people, like, there are some things that, like, those, like, you know, it's like, what does that have anything to do with me leading you and me? Like, it's just like people feel so compelled. Like, not one of those people have come and asked me because they probably might get the answer.
Yep.
Right? But it's like we feel so entitled to know. We feel like, oh, well, since you're public, right? You're on the internet. Since you're on the internet, well, we should know everything about you. And that keeps a lot of women and women leaders from building the legacy that they truly want to have. They settle for the one that's great, but they know that there's one that's powerful. And they never get there because they want discretion, they want discernment, they want a life that exists that doesn't belong to anyone else.
Yes. And, you know, I think there's a part of this too about valuing your time. So that privacy is about people valuing the fact that your time is yours. Mm-hmm. And if you are a person that I feel like I can reach out to that understands the part of my life that other people don't understand, it's not that I'm just available at all times. If I'm putting it out in the world, it's because it's part of the legacy I'm building and the work that I'm doing. And in order for me to be able to take that money and amplify it, take those resources and amplify it, you need to value my time and bring that to the party as well. And I think there's a part of this with women specifically, right? If we grow up with this kind of, is it mammification? Is that the word? Where women are viewed as mothers.
Yes.
So mothers are viewed as the people that are going to love you unconditionally and be there whenever you need and dust off your boo-boos and cook you food and be just be the given role in your life, person in your life that you can go to for what you need. You don't necessarily have to pay your mother to feed you. But there is this mammification of women in general and women leaders that makes it so there isn't this understanding that their time is just as valuable as that male leader's time. But we want to have both. We want to have you care for me as the person, and I also want you to be on 100% in your job, but also you need to do all these other things at home, and you need to show it all over the internet. But you also can't show too much. You know, the thing that came up to me when you just mentioned about showing more and more was Billie Eilish. I don't know if you've seen about how she, very intentionally covers her body, makes it so it's not about her sex appeal. It's about the music she's putting out there. And literally, the one time you see her body, it becomes like the internet breaks. And it keeps popping up all over the place. And she's like this. And the reason I showed it was to tell you that that's what's happening. But the whole messaging around why she even does it gets completely shrinks away. So you can just look at her body.
Yeah.
Literally.
We feel entitled to people who have decided to be public.
Yeah.
Right.
And even those who haven't decided, right? There are those that haven't even decided, but are. So, yeah.
Yes, especially those, and that's why at the beginning I shared that for me, I didn't know that I had permission to decide what I wanted to share.
Yeah.
Because back then, and Nikki, I think you were around in the industry for that. Back then, you share everything. You don't, it's all of, and I never have felt, I'm like,
look what I ate today. Look where I walked today. Here's where I live. Here's my address. My social security. Here you go.
Everything, right? It was, you need to be so but I don't.
You need to be so accessible. Yeah.
Too much. You know what I mean? And so, and that was a big thing. And so for me, I decided to not play the game, and therefore I wasn't known.
Yeah.
Yep. It never felt right to me.
Yeah.
But then by not being known, I wasn't able to do my work to people who didn't know me.
Yeah. So it's a delicate dance
of having to do it.
Yeah.
It was, but it doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
Because I had to remember, wait, I have the permission to decide the boundary line. Now, if you go around the line and find out the stuff, then clearly you desperately wanted to know. But I have the permission to decide how far I'm going to go with telling you about me, right? Because it is important to know the morals of people you're spending your money with. I want to say that because I will check out someone. I don't.
Always.
But I go to the things that I go to their website. I'll check out their social media. I do that kind of thing where I don't go and check with high school friends who tag them in the yearbook page.
Do you look up their dating history? I mean, really? I mean, and the other thing, when you were just talking about Google, right? Like I wonder, I mean, I've noticed this stuff as you Google people, but I wonder if there would be a difference between women that are famous and men that are famous if the first thing that comes up is their significant other. Because as you were talking about before, when you are the only woman in the room and people are asking you about your husband, I mean, that's happened in my life so often. When I'm making decisions about my life, do you want to go talk to your boyfriend or husband about that? Oh, you don't have a boyfriend or husband for me to know about? How about your dad? How about your brother? They'll help you. And it's like, they don't know anything about what we're talking about. What do you mean? And so I wonder if even as you're doing the Google search, listeners, if you do this, as you're looking up people, notice when you're looking up a guy, see if wife, girlfriend, and all that comes up, especially if he's someone that's not seen as model beautiful. If he's just a random dude that has a whole lot of power because he wasn't defined by his looks like so many women are. How does that stuff come out?
I'm curious to see about that because I just typed in the name and a few things come up. I'm like, okay. I'm like,
you're like, wait, hold up.
In the world, so because people are just frankly nosy, and it's like, because no one has asked, right? You know what I mean? It's like, you just simply want to know, but what does that have anything to do with, I can tell you that he's not Jeffrey Dahmer or Charles Manson or so you don't have to worry about any of that, right? You know what I mean? A normal human being, right? But it's like what we choose to feel that we feel obligated and entitled to know. And then the one other thing I wanted to say about that, Nikki, is with that is I feel that we have an expectation when there's a man who is in power, who's well known, who's well to do. We have an expectation that when we try to reach him, there's going to either be a fee or a gatekeeper or both. When we're reaching out to the woman, we feel that we should get directly to her personal email box, bypass. There is just this expectation.
And I can read her diary if I want.
Why are you not accessible? Like, you know what I mean? But there is, when I tell you the dynamics, and these are othered types of things, So.
Oh, well, I feel like we just got down on, I hope you just got as much as I mean, you just got to hang out with us. So no worries now.
I forgot we're recording, huh?
Yeah, right. Well, I feel like we touched on all the things and more that I wanted to talk about today. I am beyond grateful for your time.
Thank you.
Everybody, I say this with I just wish for you to have more Keisha in your life. That doesn't mean that you get her phone number and you call her, but that means that you can go check her stuff out. We're going to put her website up on the show notes page for you to be able to see the amazing work she's doing, and to really get to know more about your legacy, because every single person's legacy matters. So yes, Keisha, I love you so much. I'm so happy you're
Every
here.
single person who has an ethical legacy matters to me.
I'm going to leave it at that. All right, my friends. Keisha, thank you so much.
Thank you, Nikki.
I hope you all loved listening to this wonderful conversation with me and my friend Keisha. She is truly a light in this world. I will mention this here. If you haven't already, head on over to nikkiannison.com/podcast and scroll down till you see Keisha's face. Click on her picture and you will head into the show notes page for this episode, where you can see all the information about how you can get connected with Keisha. You can learn a little bit more about the stuff we talked about in this episode. And hopefully, if you're interested, you can poke around and listen to some other episodes as well. I hope if you've gotten to this point, you've enjoyed the episode. So if you have and you have not rated or reviewed this podcast yet, I encourage you to do so on Apple Podcasts. Until next time, I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful day.